Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier is quite arguably the main draw of Ever Crisis. Sure, the original Final Fantasy VII's plot is reformatted within the game, alongside other FF7 stories like Crisis Core, but The First Soldier is a brand new story for the series, focusing on the origins of Soldier, particularly the most famous soldier of all, Sephiroth. Despite there formerly being an actual FF7 title called The First Soldier, that game was just a battle royale. The story was always going to be relegated to Ever Crisis. As of now, there are 2 episodes of The First Soldier, with each spanning several chapters and diving deeper into the universe. In Episode 1, the story follows a group of prototype soldiers on a mission to establish a new Mako reactor. What exactly does this have to do with Sephiroth, or the greater FF7 mythos for that matter? Well, join us this time on Under the Plate, where we're recapping the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, The First Soldier, Episode 1. The rain just keeps pitter-pattering down as we see scenes from Crisis Core from Sephiroth's perspective. Lifestream particles dissipate in the air, with the bodies of dozens and dozens of dead monsters laying about. Sephiroth stands amongst the flames, waiting for a phone call to go through. However, it never does no matter how much he begs. His friend Genesis just won't pick up. As soon as Sephiroth snaps his phone shut, a dog bark resonates throughout the area. As quickly as the bushes rustle, a hooded, axe-wielding man lunges at him. The legendary first-class soldier parries the sneak attack with ease. The hooded man jumps back and sets his axe to the ground and begins speaking to Sephiroth in a more than familiar tone. Could a face from Sephiroth's past lie under that hood? However, before Sephiroth can even ascertain the identity of his attacker, the man asks, "Looking for a friend?" The only response the man has to Sephiroth's confusion is to say that he's a hero. But it matters not, as Sephiroth marks the man to be his enemy. As the encounter begins to heat up to its fever pitch, the scene transitions to over a decade before the events of the Wutai War, where we see that the enigmatic man could have possibly been this young prototype soldier named Glenn Lodbrok. And with him are his 2 companions, Matt and Lucia. The trio sit in a Shinra helicopter heading towards the Rador archipelago. We get flashes of their personalities as Glenn shows a bit of jitters being a leader for the first time. Lucia offers a bit of advice of telling Glenn to kinda stick to his ideals in a sense, which causes Glenn to show a bit of self-awareness as he reflects, showing that he knows that he has some progress to make. Although that doesn't really stop Glenn from showing a bit of cockiness, or possibly something else, when Matt says that he'll earn a bad rap in no time. But to Glenn, a bad rap is better than no rap. As the helicopter's flight path approaches the Rador archipelago, all we're left is wondering what could have possibly led this strapping young man to be battling Sephiroth in the Wutai War, on the opposite side he's on now. The CGI cutscene comes to a close as we get our first look at the chibi models and the main art style of Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier outside of battle scenes. All seems to be going according to plan as the helicopter approaches the mission area. The group begins to stand and chatter a bit. However, hostiles. Another helicopter is attacking this one. The vehicle begins to shake from the oncoming fire. Glenn goes to check on the pilot, knowing that the situation isn't exactly one they want to stay in. But as soon as he opens the door, he's welcomed to empty air. Comedically, the other half of the chopper is already gone, and the rest, containing the prototype soldiers, goes in for a crash landing. Glenn and Lucia lay, unconscious, next to the smoking helicopter in an area rife with nature sounds. Glenn begins to wake up, muttering the word, "Grandma." After shaking off his surprise of being alive, he runs over to Lucia to check on her. He reminds her of her position in the group as their advisory officer, which was made clear back in the helicopter. And he lavishes on a bit of praise by throwing out the affectionate or possibly sarcastic nickname, the Marks Queen. Glenn's humorous edge doesn't really start here, as Lucia is clearly still in a daze as she's trying to come to. He offers to take off his socks to straighten her right back up, however, she rejects. The crew of the helicopter more than likely fell into the ocean as the cockpit was completely knocked off the rest of the vehicle before it crash landed on the archipelago. Hopefully Matt's alright. So, Glenn being Glenn just immediately starts hollering at the top of his lungs to call for Matt. By his logic, if they're alive, surely he has to be too, right? And they can't really make it on this mission without his knowledge, calling him the Professor. But before they can even properly begin their search for their missing friend, they hear a roar. A local monster walks up ready to defend its territory, and Glenn jokingly asks, "Hey Matt, what happened to you?" Lucia's not very amused, but Glenn insists that in times like this you gotta have a bit of humor. The battle begins, and all Glenn can really think about is how he wishes Matt were here to tell him about the weaknesses of this monster. Despite this, it's filled with ease as these are soldiers we're talking about, but that sure doesn't stop Glenn from giving a bit of complaints about all the monsters all the time. Glenn then wonders if they should sell the information that he's acquired from defeating this beast to the bestiary people, showing a new side of himself, always wanting a bit of extra cash for some reason or another. But at least the thoughts of making some money aren't enough to deter him from what's really important: finding Matt. Before they go off on their search, Glenn seems to remember something being put on the chopper, so he runs over and gives it a quick look to find 3 outfits specially crafted for him, Lucia, and Matt. Luckily, the Mako detection kit which they need to find the spot to put this prototype reactor was still intact, so the two gear up and set off to find their missing comrade. The duo walk through a forest with Glenn still calling for Matt, shouting about how he owes him money. That'll make him come out, right? Matt was nice enough to buy him lunch and drinks, so that sits about 4,000 gil? Regardless, Glenn just wants to find his friend and pay back any debt he owes. Lucia tries to remind Glenn that they're P0 class soldiers. There's absolutely 0 loss when they die, therefore 0 debt. But Glenn believes that the living do care about things while the dead don't, and he knows Matt is alive. A monster emerges out of the woods. The duo fells it, and this just makes Glenn even more so want to prove that he's more than some class 0. Lucia then jokingly twists some of Glenn's drive by saying he's actually less than 0 because of his debts. But back in the reality of the situation, Glenn does swear that he won't let anyone else die today. And so the search for Matt continues as they delve deeper into the forests of the archipelago. For miles and miles, all that can be seen is dirt paths cutting through the lush green forests of Rador, and all that can be heard is Glenn's shouts. Though finally, the boring repetition of the sights and sounds is broken. A bright red monster, much like the previous ones they fought, appears. Glenn's first response to this entire situation is to immediately joke about this monster eating Matt. It seems like Glenn's not exactly good at taking the advice from his advisor about time and place and all that. Anyway, one felled beast later, Glenn wonders aloud if this is just some kind of monster haven, and Lucia responds by just wondering why these guys aren't eating their attackers. And that just makes Glenn believe that these things could just belong to the attackers, possibly. Their conversation is cut short, however, by an unknown voice telling them to stop right there. But, you know, that's something an enemy would say, and as luck would have it, their missing friend Matt walks up behind them. Despite not being particularly fond of being called Professor, well, the group has their professor back regardless. In other news though, look at those snazzy new duds they're wearing. Of course Matt would pick those out from probably even a mile away. Though jealousy won't be something Matt has to feel in this case, cause Glenn has a new uniform for him right here. Now that the group is back together and kitted out, it's time to sit and actually talk about their situation. So before the plan went horribly awry, the chopper was supposed to land down on the main island, because that's where the richest Mako deposits are said to be. But now that everything's completely gone haywire, they don't even know which of the Radoran archipelago islands they're even on. Step 1 is to figure out where they are. Once they can confirm their location, they can actually use the recovered Mako detection kit to help them figure out suitable spots for the test Mako reactor. Although, if Step 1's already been interfered with, that must mean that these people must be the remnants of the Radoran army. They don't exactly love Shinra because, Whatever Shinra did in the past just about wiped them out. That's why soldiers are being sent in. And Matt admits that given the circumstances, a distress signal might be their best bet. For Glenn, however, giving up on this mission isn't a choice. There's money at stake here. Lucia, as the officer advisor, doesn't really care either way. She probably sees the benefits of both. And with that being the case, Matt just relents. Glenn is the leader after all, so let's just follow his whims. So first up on the docket is some recon. You never know, they could honestly be closer to where they need to be than you could think. Whether they're just rolling with the sunnier disposition of Glenn or just believe in their capability as a group, they commit to sticking to the mission for now. Well, the next chapter's title spoils it, but they're not on the right island. Of course they're not. Despite that being spoiled, however, it becomes clear fast. Glenn notices that the island isn't very large at all, and Matt just outright lays down some geography and talks about how the coastline and elevation wouldn't line up either. So yeah, they're definitely not where they're supposed to be at all. And to make things a little stranger, there's no artillery or anti-aircraft stuff at all on the island. Really no signs of inhabitation. So this is probably just outright deserted. Glenn is kinda disturbed not knowing where their enemies could possibly be lurking. So Lucia kinda changes the subject a bit on the topic of creepy things, and their minds wander to their team test. Although it was in virtual reality, the monsters they faced were honestly quite disturbing in their visage. It becomes quite clear that you can only pull through things like that when you're a proper team. Friends even. I believe that the only reason that Matt and Glenn and Lucia can all joke how they are is because they're more than just teammates. They're actually friends. You only get that level of comfort and nonchalance about this entire situation if you truly believe that you can trust the people you're around. Yeah, they prod and poke each other. Lucia wants to take all the credit for their rank as soldiers, and Matt wants to always give Glenn a hard time, but really that's why they're all here. So what difference is a few mutant frogs gonna make, right? After continuing the survey of the island they wound up on a bit further, they stop and reconvene. It's beyond obvious at this point that there can't really be any purpose for them being on this island. There's absolutely zero military activity going on here, so clearly there must be nothing worthwhile to protect here, right? Matt and Lucia are dead set on this idea, but just something seems off to Glenn. Even though earlier he considered that they might be on the wrong island or that it could be purposeless, his mind's not really on the same track as Matt and Lucia's anymore. There's lack of any sign of life and the island is rife with monsters. So unless the Redoran military is using monsters as part of their operations, sort of like Wutai, maybe even an idea Shinra could adopt, huh? But really, they haven't discovered any evidence that suggests definitively that they are on the correct island where they need to test for a Mako reactor. Monster jumps out and attacks them, as par for the course for this island. But after it's felled and the group continues on their journey to figure out where exactly they are and how to accomplish their mission, Glenn hangs back a bit, still not convinced that there's not something wrong with this island. Something just doesn't feel right. Even going from the dense jungles of Redor to the beautiful sparkling blue waters of another part of this island, the mutant frogs just don't stop coming, do they? The soldiers stand above another felled beast, or it appeared to be so, but it rouses and lets loose a blood-curdling screech, clearly calling for backup. And they're not gonna stick around for even more of these things to ambush them, so they skedaddle. As they press forward across the beautiful sparkling waters and some collapsing bridges, of course, the ambush that they so desperately try to avoid ends up finding them anyway, as they fight through waves of the mutant frogs. The soldiers manage to slaughter several Balors, but no amount of idle banter is gonna get them through this. They're gonna run low on resources, and maybe this isn't really a good situation to be in. Things begin to look really grim until, up on the cliff rock right above them, a dog shows up and barks. Glenn immediately refers to it as Stamp, despite it not even being the same breed as the Stamp dog. And then he demands Lucia hand him her rifle, because his plan is to blast the dog and use it as a distraction to get out of here. As if Lucia would let him do that, especially since it involves touching her queen. But things don't have to come to that, because the dog jumps down off the rock and its barks actually make the Balors back off a bit. Then, a boy appears on the opposite rock and tells them to follow the dog. The group manages to get away with the help of the dog, but then the boy walks back up and also warns them that they're not safe on this island. Turns out the entire coastline they've been on this whole time is actually the territory of those monsters. In general, it might just be dangerous to stay near the ocean. But the idle chit-chat makes the monsters catch up with them. The soldiers quickly dispatch them, and the boy continues to lead them to what is hopefully some safety. While there's some definite risk involved in trusting a Redoran, as this could really just be a trap for the soldiers, Glenn decides to accept that and trust the boy. And as luck would have it, the Redoran boy actually did lead them to some safety, in a beautiful pink orchard. The fruit here is actually a deterrent to the Balors and a lot of the predatory monsters on the island. Matt's never seen fruits like this before, so he asks if they're a mutation. While the boy doesn't know, these fruit only do grow here. Sadly, the scent of the fruit only deters certain monsters. After these new beasts are defeated, the boy explains that these monsters are actually prey to the Balor, so they use this orchard as a nest of safety, the invasion of which is probably the only reason why the monsters attacked them in the first place. Almost parallels what Shinra's doing here, huh? Regardless, the boy then offers the group some fruit. If they eat it, the scent should stick to them and keep monsters away. Things appear safe, but that doesn't stop Matt and Glenn from conferring with each other to kind of assess the situation. This kid might not seem like he can fight, but there is a chance he could be working with other Redorans as an intelligence officer or even a decoy. Although he doesn't really seem like a bad kid. Well, if Glenn believes that this kid is alright, then Matt does too. Matt trusts in Glenn's hunches because, they've saved their heinies in the past. He may joke around a lot, but Glenn really does seem to have some good senses. Senses that didn't really inform him that a monster would jump out right now and attack them, of course. After all the commotion's over, Matt continues and warns Glenn to be sure to act professionally and do what a leader should do, pretty much. Glenn just yahs him and asks Matt to continue supporting him. Truly, this orchard was a godsend. The fruit's not only going to keep away monsters, but it's also quite refreshing. Despite being the only place like this on the island, it plays a vital role in regulating the ecosystem. This tiny sanctuary allows more life to flourish than normally would. It's a small detail like this that ties in with the themes of the greater compilation of Final Fantasy VII and really helps the first soldier cement itself within that universe. Well, outside of thematic parallels, the boy finally introduces his dog, Refu. But before he can even introduce himself, the ground shakes and quite possibly the loudest monster that this young man has heard is barreling this direction. If the Balor from before were mutant frogs, well, this is the king of them. However, it's still no match for our soldiers. The boy thanks them for saving his life, but he's also concerned. He's never seen a monster like this before. It must be the disrupted flow of mana or something that's causing this. Glenn returns the thanks, however, because, well, they wouldn't even be here in this orchard if it wasn't for the boy and his dog Refu. With gratitudes being exchanged, the boy just immediately cuts to the chase. You're all from Shinra, aren't you? Quickly on the spot, Glenn says that they're emissaries sent by the company to make sure any embers of war are trying to set the world ablaze. Oh yeah, and they're totally here to do it peacefully. That would be absolutely wonderful, but the boy's no fool. He immediately clocks it for a lie. At last, the boy introduces himself. His name is Rosin. Glenn then introduces himself and his compatriots, along with giving Rosin the truth. They're actually a survey unit, an advanced unit, looking for candidate sites to set up Mako reactors. And really, it was a stroke of fate that they even landed here and met Rosin due to their chopper being shot down. But the young Redoran boy highly doubts that this is where they're supposed to be. He doesn't really foresee a way for a structure to be built on this island. It's difficult enough to even build a house on this island due to its structural integrity. No way it could support a Mako reactor of all things. The main island is south of this one. However, depending on the ocean's condition, a trip like this could take anywhere from a few hours to a few days. It seems as if the party won't have to worry about obtaining a boat, as Rosin came from the main island and still has his. He says it's theirs if they want it, but isn't this a little too easy, wonders Lucia? But of course it's easy. Rosin himself admits that he just wants them to leave as soon as possible. He'll even personally guide them to where he has the boat moored. The beautiful pink orchard is left behind, and instead exchanged for a hill overlooking the coast. This is the southern coast, and if you look across to the southeast specifically, that's where the main island is. But while all that's fine and dandy, where exactly does Rosin live here? And of course, where's that boat? Rosin leads them just a little further ahead, but as they come upon his cottage, Glenn jumps back, looking at the chimney. Whatever its purpose is for, it's unknown, but it's clear that the monsters attacking it aren't good, as Rosin shows a lot of concern over it, even going as far as to say that it's more important than his own life. Of course, Glenn and company hop in and save the day. Rosin thanks them, but then kinda shifts the blame to them, saying that the only reason the monsters are acting this way is because they crashed on this island and that disrupted the flow of mana. Regardless, none of that stops the boy from offering his guests a roof and of course some tea. They all gather around the table in the cottage, but the soldiers hesitate drinking their tea. Rosin assures them that it's not poisoned. They all pick up their cups, with Glenn taking the first sip, and it's alright. Ultimately, trust wins in this case. Finally, they're able to take a breath. Glenn looks around the house, and then asks Rosin if he lives here alone. While that does indeed appear to be the case, there is some reasoning behind it, something that outsiders might not understand about the Redorans. Rosin begins to explain that what they call Mako is actually a processed form of the spiritual energy within the planet that the Redorans themselves refer to as mana. The boy does have some thoughts on Mako, but he chooses to not share them now. To the Redorans, mana is something that they both respect and fear. As for why the Redorans respect mana, just look at the Redoran archipelago. It's full of mana and brimming with spiritual energy. It's so rife with just pure life. However, as he said before, the flow of mana does change, and sadly throughout history, the Redorans in particular have been caught in this torrent and have nearly been brought to the brink of extinction many times. These mana torrents often take the forms of things like tsunamis or floods, wiping out villages in a blink of an eye. However, there are warning signs to mana disruptions. They can be seen on the eastern waters, where the outside ocean starts. And it's here on this coast where a cottage and a chimney set, and someone just like Rosin is supposed to sit here and keep watch. Truly an important lifelong duty. However, this is a task that must be trained for. The person responsible for this duty must be able to trek across the island and search for other warning signs beyond just the torrents in the ocean, and their senses must be fine-tuned to pick up anything that could be wrong. Rosin worked tirelessly through dedication to earn this. Ironically though, the boy's diligence slips and he lets loose a yawn, which of course elicits a laugh from Glenn. Rosin himself has only been here for about a year, and he's planned to be here until his death. This revelation turns Glenn's more jovial mood rather sour, and he shoots Rosin a look. Be it of concern or something else, Rosin asks him to not look at him like that. It's an honor to be the Eye of Redor, and when his duty's complete, he'll return to the planet. He then draws a line of comparison between him and the soldiers. He doesn't fear death, just like they don't. Otherwise, why would they even be on this mission? A little later, Glenn expresses that he wants to repay Rosin for his kindness that he's shown. But Rosin says that really the best thing for them is to get off this island. They really have no place here. Matt then inquires as to whether Rosin actually lives here alone. He points out that there's way too many cups for there to just be one person here, right? Rosin then explains that each of these cups is made by one of the Eyes of Redor before him. This drinkware actually turns out to be somewhat of a cultural legacy, and really it's about time that Rosin makes cups as well. And in order to make one of these cups, he'll need some soil and some wood. So Rosin decides to make a deal with Glenn. They'll call each other squared off if he actually goes to fetch these for him. Glenn and company set out and return with the finest wood and soil that they could find. While the soil may appear normal, Rosin explains that not only is it just imbued with the spiritual energy of the Redoran archipelago, but it also contains a lot of history. So the making of these cups not only honors the men before them that took this Eye of Redor title, but also the history of Redor itself. The deep meaning behind these cups spurs Glenn to ask Rosin if he would make a set of cups to honor their friendship. Sadly, the process takes about a month, so Glenn just never minds it. Outside, Matt inquires to Rosin the importance of these logs. Do they serve some special purpose, or not really? They're used for what logs are used for, keeping the fire going. But that's kind of Rosin's whole mission here. He has to keep this fire going to communicate with the other Redorans. But this island is so monster infested that even a simple task such as this is really difficult, and all Refu can really do is bark, and, well, that doesn't really chase away that many monsters. Glenn offers to go on a hunting spree of monsters. He says that he could probably slay enough to keep Rosin safe for probably a whole year. Well, Rosin kinda drops some facts about Balors and their fertility, so more would spawn than he could ever hope to hunt in the time he's gonna be here. Oh well. While they're here, they'll at least help the boy gather some of that precious firewood. After gathering up several bundles, Glenn says he could probably handle it all, as heavy lifting is kind of his thing sometimes. However, some of his leaderly sensibilities kick in. A burden shared is a burden halved after all, so teamwork will make this dream work of carrying all this wood back together, because Glenn's not going to do that by himself. Rosin offers to help carry a bundle as well. However, Glenn tells him that he's not going to ask for any more help, because how else is he going to repay the kid for what he's done? After returning to the cottage and putting away the logs, Lucia starts petting Refu and says that they should really find a way to thank him too. Glenn starts thinking, and really the only thing he can come up with is to repay a dog with bones. But Rosin bursts their bubble and says that Refu's a bit of a gourmand. Not just anything will work as a thank you gift for him. If that's the case, then Matt suggests going to hunt some Balors, and Rosin says that would be perfect. Once the team gets back, Matt notes that Glenn seems oddly concerned about the boy. Glenn responds by saying that he sympathizes with him and, honestly, he'd go nuts if he was alone. Lucia suggests that they start to liven things up a bit while they're here, and Glenn hopes to hear the boy laugh sometime soon. He probably needs it. Rosin is seen throwing logs into the furnace. This piques Glenn's curiosity, so he walks up and asks why the chimney is so large. Well, it has to be large enough for everyone on the other islands to see. It has to always be burning because there's different smoke signals to alert everyone else. Yellow tells everyone to start taking precautions because things aren't looking good. Red means evacuate immediately, and white means that the Eye of Redor is still alive. Keeping conversations moving, very typical of Rosin, he points over to the cove where the boat is. Refu's already gone ahead. Once they get over there, Refu is relentlessly barking at a monster attacking the boat. Once that's dealt with, Matt assesses the damages of the boat. The hull can easily be fixed. However, he's gonna need a battery to test and make sure the engine works. But hey, it's Shinra made, so it's pretty sturdy. Sadly, Rosin's boat battery is at the bottom of the ocean, so that's completely useless. Matt immediately turns to wanting to use a distress signal, but that's not gonna fly with Glenn. He wants that reward money. Good thing Matt already has a contingency plan that doesn't require the use of the distress signal. All they have to do is head back to their crash site and just commandeer the battery from the helicopter. As they begin to head off, Rosin pulls Glenn aside and asks him to please not do anything that would bring a search party to the island, as that would greatly disrupt the flow of mana. On the way back to the crash site, they cut through a beautiful section of the coast. It's rife with monsters, for sure, but they enjoy their time regardless, making sure to take little moments to enjoy nature, such as viewing a waterfall rainbow, looking across the ocean, and even trying some new fruit. On their trek, they eventually come across a fresh set of footprints, but these look a lot bigger than normal Balor ones. Glenn sure hopes that whatever made these tracks isn't close by. He doesn't really want to fight. He broke the ornament on his weapon. Lucia tells him to just fix it, and he says he can't fix himself, but maybe he can find something to replace that ornament with. Further down the beach, they bump into a whole group of Balors. It looks like it might break into a fight, but then a larger one busts in and begins to eat them? The remaining monsters scurry off and leaves the soldiers to fight the King Balor alone. However, a monster's still a monster and they defeat it. And Glenn even gets a replacement for his ornament that broke on his weapon, and it's a trophy to boot. All Lucia wants is to get off this island. They make it to the crash site and begin scrounging around, and as luck would have it, Glenn finds the battery they need. He then shares some of his grandmother's wisdom. Good fortune is a string of lucky breaks. Huh, isn't that the truth sometimes? And so, our merry band of soldiers head back to the cottage. Matt begins working on the boat while Glenn helps Rosin throw firewood into the furnace. He then asks the boy if he's really alright with them continuing on their mission, knowing what it could do to the archipelago. Rosin admits that he knows he's not strong enough to kill 3 soldiers, but the strongest Verdoran warriors are on the main island, waiting for them. Lucia then turns around and asks what if they took Rosin as a hostage. Unfortunately, that wouldn't work out for them because Verdorans will just choose death over putting their comrades at risk. The boy also has no family that would miss him or try to save him, so yeah. Matt then walks up, putting an end to the slightly awkward conversation, announcing that the boat has been repaired. Rosin, before the group sets out, thanks them. He hasn't talked to anyone in a while and he appreciates it, although Glenn detects something else. Oh, you really want us out of here? Yep, the boy was being a bit cheeky it seems. Glenn pats the boy on the head and they begin to head out. Rosin asks Glenn to please forget this place. Once everyone's loaded onto the boat, Rosin reminds them to go south. That's where the main island is. And he's barely used the boat, so there should be enough fuel. Glenn turns and faces away from Rosin. Some type of feelings are welling up in his chest. They all exchange some final waves of goodbye, and Rosin wishes them a safe trip, along with a prayer. So the group of soldiers finally sets out, heading towards the place they were supposed to be all along. Partway into their, luckily only few hour-long boat trip south, Glenn begins to get really eaten up over Rosin, saying that it breaks his heart that a boy is all alone without a family having to live on a dangerous island. Well really, that's just the way of the world and how different cultures work sometimes. The Verdorans just have completely different values. Glenn just gazes back at the island, relieved to see the white smoke still. As they close in on the survey area, the King Balor they defeated earlier swimming at them at high speed, it then lunges. Maybe if the party didn't want to suffer yet another crash landing, they wouldn't have Glenn taunt the monster they're trying to get away from. He's just a trouble magnet at this point. We may never know how this legendary battle went down, but more importantly, they're on the main island now, but the ruins that they have to survey are a bit more inland. Glenn looks up and suggests climbing the mountain, which, well, he can do that by himself if that's the direction he wishes to go. Sticking together seems to be the best option, especially when another Balor rolls up. It looks like they infest this island as well. They'll fight whatever comes their way for sure, but they're going to want to keep the fighting to a minimum. They don't want to drain themselves before getting to the ruins. Even the less direct path Glenn suggested at first is starting to really get high up in the mountains. And they're even having to get thrown off track trying to avoid even more of those mutant frogs. In comparison, this island is way more dangerous than the last one. Rosin has it easy compared to how much danger lurks around every corner here. For certain, no normal people could live here, so there's probably some credence to what Rosin said about the strongest Redoran warriors being here. And what perfect timing but for a Balor to just roll right up ready to fight and defend its territory. While they do want to avoid fighting to conserve stamina, Matt doesn't mind at all. He wants to complete the bestiary and is completely on board with gathering as much intel as possible. After the beast is felled, Matt, with a grin, jots down some notes, and then thanks Glenn and Lucia for helping him complete this much of this entry of the bestiary. Glenn is ecstatic at seeing the professor so happy, but Matt defensively assures Glenn that it's just part of the job. Glenn was just judging by that smile, thinking there was something more to it. And of course his greedy mind turns to hoping it was a cash bonus. Which, at this point, I don't even know if Matt's just messing with Glenn, but he's like, there could be some extra money in it. This little Balor research hunt extravaganza continues with our three soldiers huddled in some bushes. For once, they have the chance to get a jump on these things, but since they need additional information that's not combat related, Glenn opts for them to stay in the bushes and observe them from afar. Matt then accuses Glenn of only being in this for that extra reward money. Glenn then stands up out of the bushes. He is the squad leader. He does have some pride in his job. Matt himself said it was important to do. All this self-defensive shouting does is not only reveal that his friends are right about him, but attracts all of the monsters. After failing to gather, other data beyond combat data on the Balors, all Glenn can do is muster some whining about his bonus, which Matt informs him he doesn't even know if there will be a bonus. While this type of research is indeed part of the job, it's also just something Matt enjoys, and he finds this pursuit of knowledge to be its own reward. But I mean, hey, highly rated bestiaries can reap in some money, you know. The lesson of the day really is, though, soldiers just have to keep on fighting. It is their purpose. The rigorous journey up the mountain is starting to pay off. There's a beautiful view high up, and they're not far from the ruins they need to survey. But maybe a break is in order. There are a lot of monsters and conserving energy is key. After securing the area, they take a short rest. Once it's time to head out towards the ruins, Matt warns Glenn, saying that they really need to be careful. They are about to be diving deep into enemy territory. Well, they'll be that on top of the monsters. But Glenn wasn't listening. His mind was wandering over to the island with the lone Redoran boy. They're so far that they can't even see the chimney, but the white smoke is still visible, signifying that Rosin still breathes. Lucia wonders aloud if Rosin ever gets lonely being so far away from all the other Redorans. Despite her always being surrounded by cadets that she's training, it can be surprisingly isolating. Trying to be yourself around people you don't really know can be difficult. But poor Rosin doesn't even have that. The group of soldiers then swears that once their mission is complete, they'll go visit the lonely boy, maybe even bring him and Refu some souvenirs. At last they reach their designated coordinates, the Loges ruins. Thankfully, they didn't even run into any Redoran army remnants. Plenty of monsters though. Now that they're here, they need to establish a base of operations. Matt spots a cave nearby with bats. Glenn even says they could wrangle up some food with those bats, much to Lucia's disgust. A couple of monsters fly up, but those probably wouldn't make really good food. Surely there can't be fiends posted up everywhere in the ruins. Anyway, it's time to set up camp. Turns out, the cave is a great place for a base of operations. They set up a campfire and it even overlooks the ruins. Perfect. Camping out with Team Glenn ain't half bad, huh, Professor? Well, turns out that Matt is really sick of being called that. He tells Glenn he'll call him scum of the slums if he keeps calling him Professor. But that doesn't really bother Glenn. He just keeps calling him Professor. And being called scum sure doesn't bother him. He thinks it's true. But Lucia breaks up their little fight, quote unquote, because they have a job to do. So they roll out. Step 1, secure a base of operations. Check. Step 2, explore the ruins and use the Mako detection kit to find a perfect site. All those other steps come later. Now it's time to accomplish that second step. As soon as they set foot into the ruins, Glenn plops down the Mako detection kit, but it only scores a 63. What they're looking for is a score over 100. But they better be careful exploring the ruins. They could run into Redoran military remnants, monsters, and even traps. Before they continue on, Glenn asks the professor if there's any intel he could provide, but he doesn't answer until Glenn properly calls him Matt. Well, when Shinra last operated here about 10 years ago, they estimated roughly between 500 and 1,000 Redoran military remnants. There's no way they could take that many on, so they better tread carefully, especially if the Redorans don't fear death. Throughout the ruins, the party encounters these pressure plates. It requires one of them to stand on it to open a door, so there's a lot of teamwork involved with progressing through the ruins. We also continue to get a glimpse at their brilliant camaraderie. No matter how much they may poke at each other or prod each other, they really are just a group of friends and a great team. They look out for each other and worry about each other. And they're comfortable enough to make jokes. They test several locations throughout the ruins, but none of them are up to snuff. But finally, as they begin to reach the back end of the ruins, Glenn sets down the Mako detection test kit and bingo! A score of 138. That's more than what they need even. So that's step 2 checked off, but before they head on to step 3 and send some coordinates, Matt suggests that it would be prudent to actually have more than one candidate site. Well, that goes well with Glenn. Maybe there's more cash in it. After progressing a bit further, they give the test kit another go, but it's only a 22. But before they head back to the actual candidate test site, they catch a glimpse of Rosin's Island, still seeing the white smoke. Before a sense of relief can really settle, they hear a chopper, and there's probably no way it's a Shinra one. So they better head back to the candidate test site and actually transmit those coordinates, or this whole mission's a bust. They run back as fast as they can, dodging gunfire, but as soon as they reach the test site, an automaton, probably Redoran since it doesn't seem friendly, attacks them. As soon as that robot is a smoking heap, Glenn transmits the coordinates. All the stray gunfire destroys the Mako detection kit, but at least they got the coordinates sent. So they fan out and agree to meet back at their camp. The first to make it back to the camp is Glenn. He taps his foot, waiting for his comrades to show up, and oh, there's Matt. Glenn being Glenn cracks a joke, asking Matt how the hunt's going. Well, Matt's not amused, not thinking it's the time for that sort of thing. But Glenn's the complete opposite. It's exactly the time for jokes for him. At least the chopper can't be hurt anymore. It was pretty old, so they probably had to go refuel and restock on ammunition. At last, Lucia walks up. The whole group is together now, and Glenn tries to crack the same exact joke. All Lucia does is completely ignore that joke and ask if they think their transmission went through. Her prudence leaves Glenn completely dejected. Matt has faith that the transmission went through properly though, so now it's time to move on to step 4. It's time to secure the area. That also means it's time to change their outfits. Their soldier duds would be much better for this type of thing. With the soldiers all properly geared up now, Matt's about to tell Glenn something, but then shots are fired into the cave. Step 4 can wait. Screw securing the area, they have to secure themselves first. More and more rocks come tumbling down as it looks like there's about to be a cave-in. Lucia is about ready to bail. The Fibonacci sequence isn't exactly calming her down like Matt. She doesn't have worries like debt, she's worrying about her life. However, Glenn tells her to stop. His gut's telling him that the best chance for survival is to not run out of the cave, and Matt backs him up. Glenn is a professional doom dodger. Another blast rattles the cave, but this time it knocks back a wall, so there's actually an escape route now. Turns out Glenn's gut is right. They book it to another portion of the cave, but Redoran soldiers are hot on their tails. As it turns out, the rumors are true. The Redoran soldiers are rather relentless. They clearly don't fear death, and even make some soldiers struggle. These caves seem to go quite a bit further. They could bump into some bats, or something tastier. The group keeps running through the caves, but then Lucia stops. She hears something. But it's difficult to pinpoint where the sound is coming from because the caves are so echoey. Glenn begins to comedically look around, but of course, whatever's there ends up behind him. This time it's monsters instead of Redorans, but this prompts Glenn to call his comrades monster magnets. In this situation, there's really no choice but to keep moving forward. They may be monster magnets, but that's probably a better thing to deal with than all those Redorans. As luck would have it, the sound that Lucia heard was actually a breeze, so that means an exit to the outside must be near. Unfortunately, all the monsters in the cave slowed them down just enough for some Redoran soldiers to catch up. This batch of guys might have been easy to get rid of, but they're not going to be able to keep up with them if they get pinned down here. Plus, the breeze could be a false hope. What if it's just a hole, or if it leads to another ambush? When in doubt, keep moving forward though. They run through the cavern, just for it to be a dead end with a hole at the top. As soon as they turn around to try to find another exit, an entire squad of Redorans roll up. In an attempt to keep morale up, Glenn reminds his squad that their training prepared them for this and that they'll make it through. Once they defeat the Redorans, Glenn even tells his team that he's proud of them. They might be being run ragged, but they're clinging to hope. And that hope is going to pay off, because they still hear a breeze, so there's another chance at finding an exit. As they run for their lives, they find an exit of the cave covered with vines. They don't really have the time to try to find another exit, so they really hope that this brings them to safety. Glenn clears the vines and they bail out. Phew, that tunnel actually looped back around to the front of the ruins. But there's no time to celebrate as a huge blast immediately knocks all the soldiers flat on their backs. Before they can even properly get up, they're surrounded. And to make things worse, they hear a chopper. Hopefully this doesn't mean anything too horrible. Will our soldiers make it through? The group hides behind cover, ready for a chance to strike. And as soon as Glenn begins to run out, a chopper flies over. It's a Shinra helicopter. Beautiful white feathers flutter down, along with a young man. His feet touch down lightly, almost as if he floated like an angel. Even the Redoran military remnants stop in awe, catching eyefuls of brilliant silver hair and a sleek katana. In the blink of an eye, the young man dashes forward, weaving through all the oncoming fire, even cutting the bazooka missiles to pieces. Without even a visible sword swing, there's gashes in the earth, vehicles fall apart, and every soldier falls. Even with dozens of reinforcements incoming, the young man just stands. He begins charging up a fire spell, and within seconds, the flames engulf the entire enemy force and set the nearby forest ablaze. Just who is this young man? How could a soldier, younger than even our prototype soldiers here, be this strong? This young man is Sephiroth, one of Professor Hojo's own soldiers and the golden child of Shinra. He's here to provide assistance. The coordinates did reach Shinra, so he's here to take over. He tells them point blank to return to their camp. But before a conversation can really work out some of the details, two Redorans pop up behind Sephiroth. Lucia opens fire, but it doesn't appear to be necessary, as Sephiroth just effortlessly swats them aside. The silver-haired soldier reiterates, telling them to run back to their base. But they just escaped that cave. Glenn, after seeing Sephiroth's demonstration, agrees to run to the cave. He's sure Sephiroth can handle everything out here by himself, and they still have to finish step 4 and secure the area. So he leads Team Glenn back into the cave. Sephiroth is left to handle the remaining Redoran militants, and the other soldiers handle the rest of the monsters in the cave. It seems the tables turning have really fired Glenn up. He's ready to take on about anything, but there's still a certain question in his mind. What exactly are Hojo's personal soldiers? You see, the P0 class soldiers are passive. However, Hojo's soldiers are active model units, which means they've been physically enhanced and have higher compatibility with materia, unlike the plain Jane P0 soldiers. But these active soldiers are about to become the standard, living weapons. With that knowledge, Glenn has a hard time holding back his jealousy. How come they get to be so strong and important? Just like last time, the cave is full of monsters, but where are the Redorans that were chasing them? They still gotta secure the area, so they press further back into the caves, hoping to not get ambushed. After delving a bit deeper, they happen across a couple of dead Redorans. Matt examines the bodies closer. These wounds were clearly done by a monster, and, just on time, the Balor King hops out of the water, ready to fight. Once again, the King of the Balors, or as Glenn calls it affectionately, Stamp, runs away, once again making a quick escape, and also once again bringing out Glenn's pouty side. After all the commotion, they finally make it back to their little cave base, but Sephiroth's already there, telling them that they're late. He finally offers a proper introduction, while also saying that he's been sent here to assume command of the team. He then bows, praises, and thanks Glenn for his hard work. Glenn does a rather poor job of holding in a fit as his comrades introduce themselves as well. He then walks up to Sephiroth. Oh, this little modified boy. He's a cyborg. He has to be. He's not one of them. Sephiroth hangs his head as Glenn continues complaining, and then bluntly says that doesn't matter. He just wants them to obey his orders. First things first, the P0 soldiers need to swap gear, and then they need to finish step 4. They need to actually secure this place. But how's just the 3 of them and Sephiroth gonna accomplish this? Well, you heard the young man. Sometime later, all the prototype soldiers are dressed up in their other duds. Glenn's laying down resting and wakes up from a dream. Then they suddenly hear a whistle, a signal for them to leave the base camp and head to where Sephiroth is. Glenn doesn't appreciate being called like a dog, but at least he can get some of his frustration out on the monsters on their way over to Sephiroth. Once they meet up with their new leader, he lays down the game plan. South of the ruins are the Compilation caverns. When he was flying overhead earlier, he noticed that a lot of Redoran activity was over there, so he's willing to bet that's where they've set up camp. Their best bet would be to circle around and catch them by surprise. That plan is all fine and dandy, but Glenn is still fired up. He walks up to Sephiroth, the cyborg kid. He can accept that the great hero is now their leader, but he will not take being whistled at like a dog, and he threatens to rough the boy up if he does it again. With that being said, they roll out. As they make their way around, they come into an area very thick with Mako. It could be dangerous to breathe in. But before they continue, Sephiroth stops them, and he apologizes for whistling. He didn't really realize it was rude. Sephiroth never has a chance to work on teams, so he doesn't really know how to work with people well. Shocked, Glenn turns around. How could the great hero possibly be going on his first field assignment now? Of course, this is all a propaganda piece by Shinra. They're completely changing their recruitment ads. They're looking for people with high soldier potential, and they're using Sephiroth as the face of the program. Most of these great hero achievements have been fabricated. It seems Glenn's opinion of Sephiroth is beginning to shift. He walks up to him. He doesn't really think that this could be the case, especially with how this boy fights. But if it's true, he wants to help Sephiroth actually become a hero. The only problem is, Sephiroth doesn't want to be a hero. He clasps his chest and shares his wish to live a normal life. While a bit hard to believe and not really something that could happen, you never know, right? Anyway, they do have to move on, and Sephiroth reiterates his apology. Glenn walks up to the boy and gives him a pat on the shoulder before they continue on. The Redoran coast is so beautiful. The party walks along the edge of a tide pool, and then Glenn notices all natural materia. Supposedly, materia is supposed to be a crystallized form of the life stream, said to even contain memories and knowledge. This could be how it imparts magical abilities onto people. Sephiroth himself finds this a quite interesting belief, but Glenn might have some skeletons in his closet and doesn't really like the idea of his memories being passed on to someone else. What exactly did he get up to as a kid? Whatever it is, sure gave him a guilty conscience. Glenn stands straight up and offers a rather loud apology. This rather confounds Sephiroth, and he asks Glenn what he's doing. But this is adult business. Anyway, he just mostly wants to get out of this creepy place. The squad draws close to the Compilation caverns. Sephiroth stops and appears to work up the courage to ask a question. He pulls out his locket and shows the group a picture, asking the prototype soldiers if they've seen this woman. It's his mother, Genova. Unfortunately, none of them have ever seen nor met this woman. Professor Hojo gave him this locket, but never told him anything else. Whenever he gets the chance, Sephiroth asks around, hoping to find any clues as to the whereabouts of his mother. Sephiroth is aware that it's not exactly a cool thing for the great hero to be asking people all the time, and Glenn's not afraid to remind him that it's not cool. Tactless as ever. But anyway, they're about to the base, and they need to get ready for this. Before they can even take another step, they're greeted not by Redorans, but monsters. After sending those beasties directly to the life stream, Glenn puts his weapon away, and asks Sephiroth if he was probing them for information because he was thinking they might die. Honestly, it never occurred to the boy, but he giggles. It's actually quite fun talking with other people, huh? Even if they are a bit rough around the edges. With a ruffle of the hair, a pat on the back, and a nod, Sephiroth is slowly becoming a member of the squad truly. With the Redoran military base infiltrated in secret, it's time to finally complete Step 4. All monsters and Redorans must be eliminated. If all Redorans are meant to be eliminated, does that even include the women and children? Sephiroth begins to justify it. I mean, he is a kid too. Plus, any of these old folks could be combat veterans. This doesn't really set well with Glenn, but Shinra owns this island, and the Redorans are about to be reminded of that. The soldiers get the jump on some Redoran militants, but in order to progress further, they're going to have to figure out the contraptions that operate the gates. Some of the sections of the base are blocked off, so they'll have to make do and head some other ways. The more they explore the base, the more they see that the Redorans appear to live here. They find a storage area and even a place where it looks like they live, complete with dishware and tables. Within this lived-in mess, Glenn finds the key to operate the contraption, letting them forward. After the gate opens, the group chases down some Redorans. Before they can catch up, however, a giant automaton, clearly aged, attacks them. The machine is so old, in fact, that it's not even in Sephiroth's records, so they'll have to be careful and improvise this fight. These words of caution, however, seem like they were only for the other soldiers, because as soon as the fight's done, Sephiroth is nowhere to be seen. Oop! There he is. He just went slightly ahead because he saw movement. Glenn and company chase down the Redorans. However, a gate closes, giving the militants a perfect chance to attempt an ambush. Unfortunately for the Redorans on the other side of the gate, it looks like the King Balor broke in and is doing its own siege. So that didn't really work out for those guys. Glenn just knows that King Balor is going to be right on their tails, so they better eliminate these Redorans and get out of here. After their bodies hit the ground, the King Balor runs off, clearly on a fast track to wrought some destruction, and chase down those soldiers. Well, that's their cue. They run off to get away from the King Balor and try to find Sephiroth again. The group reaches an exterior sanctum, with water and some stone pillars forming bridges. And this is where they see Sephiroth slay several Redorans. It turns out the squad Glenn and company were chasing down was a diversionary team, to let people who couldn't fight escape. But did Sephiroth really have to cut these poor people down? They could have maybe used them as bargaining chips or something. But that's not the mission. They're not here to peacefully ask the Redorans to build a reactor. They're here to take the land by force. And this little skirmish also proved Sephiroth was right earlier. These kids were way too deliberate with their movements to not have received military training. That's why they should never underestimate their opponents. These same assumptions about age and strength are also things that Sephiroth suffers from, something he strives to always prove wrong. A good soldier needs to be strong in body, mind, and heart, and a strong heart must be ruthless to cut it as a soldier. A soldier who is wavered by their emotions has no business being on the battlefield. In the real world, in war, the only way to survive is to kill or be killed. Seeing how much is going through Sephiroth's mind lights something up in Glenn, and he walks up to the boy and gives him a hug. And Glenn agrees. It is life or death out here. But Sephiroth has nothing to prove. His team knows just how strong he is. Power is something this boy has in spades. But maybe he could start showing some compassion. After Glenn pulls away, Sephiroth says that he's not a cyborg, thus making Glenn go in for yet another hug. He then apologizes to Sephiroth. He should have never said that. Our jokester just seems to have a penchant for calling people nicknames they don't want to be called. Once this emotional moment wraps up, they continue step 4 of the process. The group happens upon another outcropping. The island with white smoke protruding from it is visible in the distance, prompting Sephiroth to ask what exactly is on that island. Glenn replies and tells him that it's the home of a boy similar in age to him who also has something to prove. You know, these lonely boys sure seem to have fun talking to this group of adults. Let's hope that they're just strong enough to carry these types of burdens. One's not meant for young people. Once this mission is complete, that'll leave Rosin alone. He'll be the last Redoran if they complete this mission. With the island finally secured, Shinra reinforcements arrive. Plans are underway to make the small-scale Mako reactor. With pretty much nothing left for them to do, Team Glenn mostly just monitors the white smoke, hoping everything is fine with Rosin. Glenn is snapped back to reality when Matt and Lucia walk up to him and tell him that the dig has already begun. Man, within days, Shinra sure does move fast, but they couldn't have done it without the excellent groundwork Team Glenn laid. Or Sephiroth, rather. On to more important matters, though. Glenn wants to know how they plan to split the bonus pay. The little silver-haired soldier doesn't seem too interested in money, so... dang it, the engineers are calling. Oh well. All the chief engineer has to say is just nag, nag, nag. They need to do their rounds, cause there's apparently monsters nearby. Well, I guess step 5 is to protect the engineers while they do all this. But there's something more pressing to Glenn. Where's Sephiroth disappeared to? Apparently Sephiroth's been heading out on his own and scavenging bodies? Regardless of his reasons, they can at least do their rounds and try to track the boy down, maybe even learn why he's doing this. So they head out. The group travels through the dense woods, slaying monsters for their rounds and trying to keep an eye out for Sephiroth. A glint in the dirt then catches Glenn's eyes. A materia fragment. Being just a fragment and all, it's not particularly useful for their needs. But they're drawing close to the caverns where the Redorans made their base. If Sephiroth's scavenging corpses, then this is where he's got to be. Maybe this is some kind of sick joke, but what possible reasons could the boy have for looting corpses? Well, it looks like the rumors are true. Sephiroth really is scavenging these bodies. Yeah, this might not look great for the young hero, but he's looking for the locket that has the photo of his mother. He really does not want to lose that. Not really knowing where else it could possibly be, there has to be a chance that it could be hiding under one of these bodies from the mission a while back, right? Glenn and company offer their assistance. They should clear out this place anyway, right? Matt notices that there's fewer bodies than there were days ago. And that's the handiwork of the monsters, it seems. This is the last sort of thing Glenn wants happening to him. But then Sephiroth, despite being a young man, begins lecturing the older soldiers. Just because you think it's safe doesn't mean it is. There's still monsters about, and to prove his point, Sephiroth charges up a spell and blasts a monster that was going to sneak attack the group. Sephiroth is quite diligent, believing that it's his responsibility to protect his squad, because he's the leader after all. You know, I bet a certain former leader of a squad could learn a thing or two from this young man, as does Matt. Whoever this violent bully that Matt and Lucia are talking about is, they must be pretty awful, huh? Maybe if someone's trying so hard to be memorable, maybe they just fear being forgotten. Sometimes even the young have wisdom the old don't. Possibly. Moving on, with the group helping Sephiroth search more bodies, something strikes Glenn as odd. There's not quite as many Redorans as he thought there'd be. There's supposed to be between 500 and 1,000, right? There wasn't nearly that many, but really, living here must have taken its toll. Whatever Shinra did in the years past must have severely weakened them. I mean, they're living in caves and such, fighting off monsters every day. Maybe if the Redorans' ideals weren't so strong, they could have had a good relationship with Shinra and none of this may have ever happened. But maybe there's something here that Glenn just can't understand. He hasn't lived a life without the comforts of Mako. The conversation is cut short because there's some hungry monsters just around the corner. They're probably sick of feasting on dead bodies and want something a bit more fresh. Fighting off the monsters got Matt's brain juices flowing. To him, it seems like the Redorans were very similar in belief to those who follow planetology, which is a belief system that posits that spiritual energy returns to the life stream whence a living being dies. That energy is then recycled into new life. This circle is supposed to enrich all of life. and the Redorans believe in this, well, with only one of the major differences being they refer to the Mako or life stream as mana. Following this logic, it makes quite a bit of sense as to why the Redorans wouldn't want to build a Mako reactor. If they view the life stream as a river of spiritual energy, then of course they wouldn't want to deplete something so important to their beliefs. Glenn can't really overcome the cultural barrier here. He does see the life stream as just a resource. Sephiroth then shares a piece of wisdom Professor Hojo shared with him. No matter how logically you explain something, there will always be people who don't understand because they have a different view of the world. Kinda proving the point of the saying, Glenn continues. He believes it's better to live your life in comfort. I mean, look at the Redorans now. They stuck with their beliefs and there's only a single one left. At this point, even after the years it takes to build the reactor, who's gonna be here to remember the Redorans? Will the planet remember for everyone? This sharing of worldviews begins to crack away at Glenn. He's kinda starting to understand what they mean. Maybe the life stream is a resource too precious to burn. Maybe life really does go back into the life stream, and maybe the planet does remember. Maybe that's all anyone wants. Hall after hall, body after body, and the locket still isn't found. Matt asks Sephiroth if he's even sure he lost it here. Well, he had it before he entered the ruins, so where else could it be? If it is lost somewhere else, and they can't find it, Sephiroth will accept that it's just lost. Poor kid. If they're gonna be spending all this time searching bodies, they may as well bury them, right? It might not be the Redoran way, but Glenn doesn't know what else to do. He feels that he has to apologize to them. Sephiroth and the others agree to help as well. They begin moving as many bodies as they can outside and burying them, gingerly placing their shields atop the mounds of dirt. A rumble in the distance interrupts them paying their respects to the dead Redorans. The Mako reactor test site dig is about to begin. It'll take about half an hour, but it'll be so dangerous that they have to retreat to an aerial position. The start of the excavation will involve setting off explosives, but this could trigger a chain reaction with the Mako and cause a huge catastrophic event. In fact, it's even happened before. Of course Shinra wouldn't mind. This type of Mako explosion is called a mana torrent by the Redorans. Glenn then recalls Rosin speaking of the same thing. These events have the ability to wipe out entire areas of villages and people in an instant, much like a tsunami. It's only a matter of time until they'll have to evacuate, so they try to bury as many bodies as they can before they have to leave. Once it's time to head back to the dig site, Glenn laments at the big bundle of roots that blocks the way. Last time they had to go completely around it. Sure be nice if it could just be cut through or something. Well, Sephiroth has an idea. He picks up the materia fragment that Glenn and company found earlier. These soldiers might not be able to use it, but Sephiroth can. He then casts a fire spell and burns away the roots in a huge blast. Since it's just a fragment and not a full materia orb, it shatters upon its use. But Glenn does not care about those details. He's just reeling from the fact at how amazing Sephiroth is. This time, the journey back to the excavation site is so much faster with Sephiroth's help. The boy is absurdly talented, doing things like cutting down a tree in a single stroke and freezing an entire waterfall and river. These shortcuts help them make it back to the excavation site in record time. They gotta make it back to the chief engineer before the dig starts, or else their own safety is risked. Glenn's mind immediately turns to Rosin. What's he gonna do if something goes wrong? They don't really have the time to dawdle, so they keep moving, but not before Glenn takes a look out on the outcropping that they've passed several times up to this point. Still white smoke. At least he's alright. But now the white smoke is meaningless. There's no one that Rosin needs to tell that he's safe anymore. With all his heart, Glenn just wants to make sure Rosin can be safe, but they don't really have the time or means necessary to ensure anyone else's safety but their own. Glenn calls for Sephiroth's attention, but whatever he was gonna say, he holds back. Time is of the essence, after all. The rest of the group runs off as Sephiroth lingers for a few more seconds, stealing a glance at the chimney with the white smoke. By the skin of their teeth, they make it to the dig site in time. They're the last ones that need to be loaded up. But Glenn has a favor to ask the chief engineer. He wants just 10 or 15 minutes even to... Nope, there's no way. The chief engineer says that it's already too late. Mako fumes swirl up from the ground as Glenn begs. There's someone's life at stake here, but Shinra's already spent so much money on this dig. I doubt they're gonna really want to pour more money into it for a delay. In a fit of rage, Glenn decks the chief engineer, who threatens his job. Glenn tells the chief engineer to run to his chopper, as they're about to commandeer this one. Right here, Matt and Lucia could have abandoned Glenn, favoring to keep their jobs instead, but once a team, always a team. Lucia throws herself into the cockpit of the chopper, booting the pilot from the seat. Before they can take off though, they hear the chief engineer scream, and they see Mako gas envelop the nearby chopper. Something's on its way. The chief engineer and the other staff make their escape, and what appears from the Mako mist but stamp? But it's been heavily mutated. The King Balor is now something entirely different, a monster of all monsters. Despite everything, Glenn offers an apology to the beast as it fades away back into the livestream, apologizing about destroying its home and promising to take care of the new weapon ornament he received from it. The chief engineer flies back over and drops down a rope ladder for Sephiroth. He is the golden boy of the company, and he doesn't really have to affiliate himself with these 3 defunct soldiers. After a few moments of deliberation, Sephiroth runs off with the P0 soldiers. What are they gonna do? Fire him? Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, the young soldier is beginning to exhibit some compassion. One thing's for certain, a simulator sure cannot replicate what actually being out in the field or in the pilot's seat is like. In the back of the chopper, Glenn's really starting to think about how many people they killed, just to try to save one. Maybe he's just not cut out to be a soldier. Can he not steal his heart well enough? Once the chopper nears the islands that Rosin is on, we get to really see what this mana torrent business is like. The skies are dark, the winds blow, and you see lifestream particles everywhere. It looks like the world could shatter at any moment. And to make things worse, we see Rosin throwing log after log into the furnace, the red evacuation smoke billowing from the chimney, and lots of Balors are zoning in on him. Unfortunately, the chaos of the torrent makes it obscenely difficult to land the chopper. They won't be able to land right next to Rosin, but they'll land on a nearby hill and make their way towards him. Once they finally manage to land the chopper, Glenn tells Sephiroth he should stay here, but isn't it a little late for that sort of thing? But before they can really discuss anything else, they're immediately jumped by monsters, which this time around are a bit different. The Mako must be changing them. All the beasts are way more agitated than they normally are. Sephiroth offers to help cut through them. And while that's nice and all and will definitely help them get to Rosin faster, there's just so many other things that are making this difficult. As they press forward, they'll have to try to strike a balance between caution and speed. Easier said than done for sure, especially with the ground crumbling beneath your feet. Hopefully the chopper's still here when they're done, or else they might not make it off the island. The odds of actually making it out of here alive are looking pretty slim, but as long as they trust in each other to do what needs to be done, then maybe they can pull through. With Glenn's sharp instincts and Sephiroth's amazing power, they may just have a chance. Well, I'll be. The boy's not even still at the cottage. It looks like Rosin must have made it through all those monsters that were surrounding him. But man, talk about diligent. He's still out here gathering firewood to contribute to the smoke signal. And it's a good thing the party decided to come here to rescue him, because there's really no way poor Refu's barks could ever scare away an actually mutated Balor. After that monster is all said and done, Rosin's rather confused as to why they're here. Well, obviously a lot's happened since they went to the main island. And now Glenn and company are here to rescue Rosin from this utter catastrophe. This poor lone boy, though, doesn't know that his job serves no purpose anymore. There's nobody left to warn. Rosin pleads with Glenn. He can't easily make it back to the cottage because of all the monsters, but he has to get back. He has to warn his people. And this is when Glenn drops the truth on Rosin, something the boy probably would have never known, but all of his people are gone. Rosin is the last of the Redorans, and the people to blame for this are Glenn and everyone else. In shock, the boy responds with denial. How could all of his people be dead? He's still here. And if this group of soldiers was too weak to even kill him, how could they have killed an entire group of people? This poor, poor naive boy. All Glenn can do is look at his hands and offer the most heartfelt apology he probably ever will in his life. They were just following orders and really didn't feel that they had any other choice. But Rosin doesn't want to hear it. He just wants these people to be away from him. The boy runs away back to the cottage in despair, with the group of soldiers following right behind him. The instability of the ground in general makes this very hard to traverse, and to make things even worse, Matt announces that the island is more than likely sinking at this moment. Rosin may not want anything to do with them right now, but they're willing to take him by force. Maybe they can save at least one Redoran. Glenn orders Sephiroth to go back to the chopper, but he objects. It'll be faster if he goes to retrieve Rosin. They have a quick back and forth trying to decide who's gonna do what, but really, it might be best to send Sephiroth. Even earlier, Glenn said that Sephiroth and Rosin were about the same age, and honestly pretty similar in some ways. There's a chance Sephiroth could convince Rosin to actually come with them willingly. They fist bump in agreement and Sephiroth leaps away. But it doesn't look like Glenn and company are gonna go prep that chopper after all. They're just gonna tail behind Sephiroth. Monsters yet again block the way, with Matt theorizing that the Mako reaction could be making their brain chemistry change, wanting them to purge all outsiders. Thankfully, this group of monsters falls into the crust of the earth. Although, this moment is quite sobering to Lucia. They were quite literally just a few feet away from the same thing happening to them. What matters though is that they're still alive. This Monotorrent really is no joke. It's apocalyptic. And it feels like the planet's very own wrath. But this is the norm for Shinra. They don't really seem to care. Glenn, however, doesn't feel right in placing the blame solely on Shinra. It's people like him, Matt, and Lucia that do their dirty work. The blood's on their hands as well. To Glenn, these types of actions are a spit in the face to his grandmother. He wanted to put good back into the world. But that's not really what this seems to be now. Right here, Glenn swears that he wants to start doing what's right, and take control of his own destiny. He has freedom of choice, and he's willing to take responsibility for his actions. This path won't be lonely for Glenn, however, because his friends honestly really knew what they were getting into joining up with him anyways. Up ahead, they find Refu and ask him to guide them to Rosin. The group then follows suit behind the dog, hoping to find the boy on time. Back at the chimney, we see that Rosin's cottage has been completely and utterly destroyed, with the Balor staying by the furnace. As it looks like the young and final Eye of Rador is about to make his final stand, he's quickly saved. In a blinding flash of steel, Sephiroth cuts down 3 Balors and saves Rosin. Sephiroth barely manages to introduce himself before Rosin tells him to leave and continues throwing wood into the furnace. Being rather blunt, this is rather useless, no? Rosin begins to crack. He doesn't know what to do. What else is he supposed to do? And Sephiroth, being a young and inexperienced boy himself, has no clue how to comfort another person. In the nick of time, Refu guides Glenn and everyone else to Rosin. Maybe they'll make it out of here. But, almost like a stage cue, the ground begins to shake, and the blood-red Balor is itching to pick a fight. While this is happening, it looks like Sephiroth and Rosin were continuing some sort of exchange. But then Glenn notices Sephiroth unsheath his sword, and with a clean, single strike, Sephiroth kills Rosin. Glenn screams in anguish. What was the point of all of this? A crack forms between Sephiroth and Glenn, and the red Balor tumbles into the crack into the exposed Mako in the crust. But what comes back out of that crack is no normal monster. It's a horrid amalgamation of who knows what. With that thing out of the way though, Glenn and company make the jump over the crevice. The group stares at the scene before them, with Rosin on the ground lifeless, Refu grieving, and Sephiroth just standing there, emotionless. Glenn grabs the silver-haired boy by his collar, asking him if he even tried to talk to Rosin. Then, out of nowhere, the livestream bestows a gift. Sephiroth's lost locket. It must have gotten swept into some sort of Mako stream earlier. Sephiroth pushes Glenn off of him and begins to march towards his possession. Out of anger, Glenn throws the boy to the ground and punts his locket back into the livestream. Emotionally fractured, the group makes their way back to the chopper and gets on a call with the chief engineer. It's only a matter of time until these islands sink. The layer of bedrock beneath the islands was already weak, and the explosions from the excavation just kind of set everything else off. This entire mission was a typical Shinra bust. Everything's been reported back to the head office, including Glenn and his friend's insubordination. After this rather glum phone call, Sephiroth walks up carrying Refu. They might not have been able to save Rosin, but at least a life is getting saved. The chopper ride back begins silent, with the only sounds being the rotation of the chopper blades, the barking of Refu, and the sinking of the Radoran archipelago. With the events of Rador in the far distant past at this point, we cut back to where our story began in episode 1 of The First Soldier. What we saw earlier in CGI is now done in the chibi art style. Sephiroth is still calling Genesis with him not picking up the phone, and then he's attacked by a mysterious hooded man. However, this time the scene continues on further than what we saw originally back in chapter 1. As Sephiroth is about to launch the Faraga spell, a dog interrupts him. Sephiroth recognizes this dog. This dog is Refu, Rosin's dog, and the hooded man is revealed to be Glenn after all these years. Ironically, Sephiroth actually never knew Refu's name. He then inquires as to how Matt and Lucia are, and they're apparently good. Pleasantries aside, however, Glenn actually comes bearing time-sensitive information. There's a planned air raid to eliminate all of the defected soldiers, including Genesis. Apparently Heidegger just received the order directly from the president, but how could Glenn possibly have this information? Friends in high places is the word, huh? The safest spot to avoid this bombing will be the south side of Fort Tamblin. Glenn also anoints Sephiroth to be the one to spread the word, simply because he can't. Before Glenn walks off to do who knows what, after all these years, he apologizes to Sephiroth about the necklace. Wordlessly, Sephiroth sprints off into the night to warn the soldiers of the oncoming bombing raid. Before long, he's interrupted by some vengeful Wutaians. But of course, the legendary soldier cuts them down with ease. After the Wutaian soldiers meet an unfortunate end, Sephiroth thinks about the cycle of hate. He believes that it can be broken through compassion, a lesson that Glenn taught him, and that Glenn honestly just reinforced with that apology that he just offered about the necklace. Who would have thunk he would have remembered nearly a decade later? At last, Sephiroth makes it to the encampment, and immediately warns the infantrymen nearby that there's going to be an attack on the base, and everyone needs to retreat to the south side of the fort. However, this command doesn't quite work. Only their higher-up officer can actually order an evacuation. The infantrymen will go talk to their captain, though. Even if they could evacuate at this moment, it seems a landslide is blocking the path down south. A Shinra trooper did take a unit down there, but there were too many monsters to clear the path, and the attempt alone has resulted in many casualties. The trooper then enlists Sephiroth, and he runs off, promising to save as many lives as he possibly can. When he arrives, there's several infantrymen dead on the ground, with the rest firing their machine guns at endless waves of monsters. But now, it's time for the legendary hero to step in and prove his worth. Sephiroth is almost inhuman in how many monsters he can take down, After an arduous battle, Sephiroth falls to his knees, and it looks like he's cleared away all the monsters. Sadly, this is not the case, and a behemoth jumps into the fray. Sephiroth tells himself to stay strong and save everyone. The bravery on display boosts the morale of the Shinra infantrymen, and they raise up arms to help Sephiroth defeat this behemoth. Despite the odds, he pulls through. A true hero, indeed. Something that everyone will know through word of mouth, camera flashes, and cheers. As Sephiroth takes his walk of victory, his head throbs, with images of that fateful day flashing in his mind. All those years ago, Sephiroth asked Rosin what he truly wanted, and his answer was to be killed. He didn't want to be the only one left. If he was going to be anywhere, he wanted to be dead with the rest of his people. Sephiroth offers the Radoran boy a place among him and Glenn. However, Rosin doesn't believe there's a place for him in their world. Sephiroth continues to beg to Rosin. He says he'll help him find a place, and if not for him, to at least do it for Glenn, Matt, and Lucia. They're too kind for their own good, he believes. There has to be a way, right? Rosin tells Sephiroth to just get it over with. If he doesn't kill him, they're gonna waste their time and everyone else is gonna die. So Sephiroth has to choose whose lives he believes to be more important to save. Faced with this difficult decision, Sephiroth swallows whatever he's feeling and draws his sword, and with a graceful respect, gives Rosin a final act of mercy. Truly, it is our decisions that make us. They set us on the path we decide for the future, and we see imagery of Sephiroth standing on the edge of creation, just like the very end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. What could this portend? This episode alone has connections to Crisis Core, Rebirth, and many other parts of the Final Fantasy VII compilation. What's in store for Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis the First Soldier, Episode 2, and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3? Stay tuned to Final Weapon and Under the Plate for all things Final Fantasy VII.